So this is part 2 of the stylized hair sculpting tutorial. In part 1 it was mostly just about planning, so we finished that. Now we're going to start part 2, which is broken down into 3 main segments: roughing in the shapes, the 3D sketching portion, retopologizing and cleaning, and photo matching. This is going to be where the bulk of the work is done, and it's going to be sped up, so I'm going to give you as much detail as I can during that process. But it's going to be sometimes talking at a high level. So my recommendation is, if there's something that I mentioned that you're not sure about, you can dig in further with searching on YouTube, or I have a lot of tutorials to cover a bunch of it, which I'll link in the description. Okay, let's get started. Hey, so here we are in Zbrush, and what I have here is Lauren's model at this point, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to be editing this model to create the hair and then ultimately get it to match the concept, the whole thing a little bit closer. But it's a great starting point. And as such, you can see there's no hair here right now. So the first thing to do really is create this hair cap, which is going to be the base for this sort of rough sculpt in for the hair. So the process that I'm using here is to sketch in roughly what the hair volumes are, just using typical sculpting tools mixed with Dynamesh and Sculptris Pro. And then once I kind of have the forms in there roughly, I can go through and start cleaning it up so that it's a little bit of a nicer mesh, and I can do other things with it at that point, which we'll cover in detail. This first portion here is really at actual speed, I think. So it's going a little bit slow, but it'll speed up for sure. The reason why I started out slow is just so I can talk through some of these fundamentals first, but then it'll speed up when it's sort of like repetitive tasks where you can see that I'm kind of like using the same type of methods throughout. But at the moment right now, I'm duplicating the base head mesh, and I am right there. I was just using the hide and unhide in the viewport feature with a mask with a lasso select. So once I generally use lasso select for both masking and visibility. There are times where you want to use the mask pen, which is like painting a mask, but yeah, for now it's just using that because it's a little bit easier. And I'm just testing out to make sure that, okay, this is actually another mesh on the surface, and then I'm seeing like, okay, is this actually sculpting, and undoing it. So this is just the preparation for this sort of skull cap. The next thing I'm thinking about here is, should I add thickness or should I leave it as just a plane? I decide that I'm going to add thickness because that's going to play better with Dynamesh. Dynamesh can freak out if it's actually just a plane. It's also better with Sculptris Pro. So I'm just adding like extra thickness. In my UI there, you see that there's dynamic turned on. I have a hotkey for that. And then if I use offset and adding thickness, it's kind of like extruding it, but it's just visualizing the extrusion. And then when I press apply, then it's like an actual mesh like that. So that's how I added thickness here. Generally, I'll use ZModeler to add thickness, which you'll see me do later. But this is what I did in this case. And now I'm cleaning up all those like ugly jaggies with the Sculptris Pro mode turned on. You can see that in the top left. Again, custom UI, I definitely recommend that you customize your UI, because if you don't, then you're going to be digging through menus and that'll really slow you down. So you can use my UI. I have it available to download. But maybe even better is to just build your own up over time with things that you notice that you're using and putting them in places that make sense to you. So my UI can be a little intimidating because I built it up over time and I know exactly where everything is. But for most folks, if they just start with this, they're going to be sort of flabbergasted like why it is the way it is. Right here you see that I just changed the scale. That went kind of fast, so apologies for that, but you can use Scale Master to change the scale of your model. And the reason why I wanted to fix the scale leveraging that was because all the tools don't really work quite right if you don't have the right scale going. I have another tutorial about how to do this for scale, but if you slow down this video, you can see exactly what I did there too. It's just scale unify there. But so now that I've actually fixed the scale and I have a skull cap, I'm starting to just sculpt on this. And mostly, like I said, I'm just using Sculptris Pro, turning that off and on. If Sculptris Pro is on, then it's going to dynamically tessellate the model as I sculpt. So that's cool because I can add detail as I go. That's what dynamic tessellation is. It's really like modifying the topology, adding and subtracting geo as you sculpt. One of the main things that I use with Sculptris Pro on is I use the smooth brush with Sculptris Pro on, which actually will, depending on the size of my brush, will add more geo. So it takes a little bit of getting used to, but once you do, it's really handy, really fast way to work. So if I notice that I want more geo in an area, I might just make my brush small and then smooth, and then I'll have a ton of geo to work with. And again, yeah, just go ahead and sculpting there. The kind of one rule to watch out for with Sculptris Pro mode is that you can't have backface masking turned on. Sometimes you might want that on. I have it in my UI again, so I can see that it's on or off. But yeah, if you have it on, you won't be able to use Sculptris Pro. It'll give you a warning, and you'll have to turn it off for that. There's a couple other tools like Move Tool that won't work with Sculptris Pro, but you can use other things like Snake Hook potentially if you need to move something and have it tessellate with Sculptris Pro mode on. But no worries there, it'll just automatically turn off if you can't use it in a particular circumstance. So now I'm kind of like getting a little noodly with some stuff with the head, because I'm noticing with the current shape of the head, I want to sort of like refine some of those shapes so that the hair that I'm sculpting will match the reference better. So sometimes you need to change like the underlying geo in order to really match a particular hairstyle, because obviously if your head is too big, then no matter what you do, the hair that sits on top is not gonna sit quite right. So here I'm just sort of stretching things out and then smoothing so I get more geo. I could just pull stuff around and then smooth with Sculptris Pro mode on. Another thing I could do is I could be using Dynamesh and then just running that Dynamesh function when I need more geo. The reason why I sometimes don't like to do that is if you do run Dynamesh, it's gonna evenly, so this could be good or bad, but it will evenly disperse polygons across your entire mesh. So that could be good if you just want to quickly get everything even again. But it will be really bad if you have like a little detail that you want to preserve, because then that little detail might get evenly dispersed and then it just gets muddied up. So you'll actually lose some smaller details if you do that. So yeah, there's times where you'll want to use Dynamesh and times where you won't. But in this case, you'll notice that I mostly don't use it, at least in this beginning phase. And it's just Sculptris Pro to add and subtract geo, so that I can get these interesting shapes sort of blocked in there. And I can use the snake hook to pull out shapes. I think I might have just did that there with Sculptris Pro mode on. See right there, what I'm doing is I'm actually showing and hiding the mesh. And the reason why is because I'm noticing that it's sort of hard for me to get at these little pieces that when they're overlapping each other. Like if I need to move just the one piece, it's going to select the other piece, and that's not necessarily what I want. And so when you see that sort of like it looks like a piece is just growing there, what I'm doing there is I'm just making the end point visible, and then I'm just pressing the grow visibility button. And when you see it sped up, it looks pretty cool actually, but when I'm doing this at real-time speed, it's a little bit slower. It might slow your computer down a bit depending on what kind of computer you have. But generally what I find is if you select a small end piece and then you grow, that's sort of like the best way to isolate a single piece. And then once you have that piece isolated, you can polygroup it, so then you can select it easily again at any time in the future. So when you notice me sort of selecting little pieces and then growing them like that, it's really just a matter of giving myself more control when I'm running these functions. Another way you can get some control is once you have polygroups, you can turn on auto masking by polygroups. And so that's something I have in my UI as well. And so I'll do that a little bit here and there. And of course, you know, that can just help you move a little bit faster versus selecting a polygroup, masking it, and then making the changes that you need. There's a few extra steps there. So, but it's mostly just about like getting that in your UI so that you can do it quickly, because otherwise it defeats the purpose of speeding things up, right? And honestly, like that's what a lot of sculpting is in general, is trying to find the most effective way and the fastest way to do something. And it's all just kind of like problem solving and visualizing the shapes in your head, and then executing on those shapes. So right here, I'm getting a little bit noodly with some other things. I tend to do that from time to time, but honestly, like one thing that's important when you're sculpting is to create landmarks. So when you have landmarks on a model, that just gives you a point of reference for other details. And so when you have some of those details in there, then it makes it clear to you, well, how much is this matching the concept right now? So if I add these little kind of streaks on the side of the head, I can look at it from the front and be like, okay, are those streaks in the right place? Are they like, if I notice that there's like a really big space between where the streaks start and like that corner on the top of the head, then I might say to myself, well, that's the shape of the head is actually probably wrong, because there shouldn't be so much space between if I have those streaks laid out kind of properly. So just like those are like sort of more drawing fundamentals so that you can find shapes and find details. It would be really hard to just place an eye in an open space, but if you just go ahead and you try to get something eyeball shaped to start, and then you start building up the other forms, then you sort of have a better understanding of the relationships. And once you have an understanding of the relationships, then you have something to work with there, and you can modify things and move forward. So it's really just a process of building things up over time so that you can make the right judgments about where things lay out, which is a good segue to sort of like the idea behind this process right now with me doing like a rough sculpt like this that's just kind of loose. Is I'm not being like too worried about it really. Like I try to take the pressure off of myself. I'm just doing my best, trying to get pieces that feel like they're the right shapes that I see from the front, and then imagining, okay, like what would this shape kind of be like as it goes back in space. So you can see now the sculpt is coming along. I'm getting some of the base shapes in there, and I'm just trying to continue to match up what I see, and this will just be a rough version that, like I said, not putting too much pressure on myself, just getting landmarks in there that I am eyeballing at this stage, because later on we can get more specific once we have the general shapes there. That's going to be like, you'll notice later on in later parts of this, there's a lot of retopologizing. We'll go into detail about like why and how, but knowing that I'm going to do that is actually making this a little bit easier for me right now, because I just have to do my best with the eyeballing portion. And so you're probably curious right now, well, what brushes are you using here? It's kind of hard to tell when it's sped up. Like I said, I'm using Sculptris Pro, but besides that, like how are you sculpting? Generally, like what I'm doing sculpting wise is kind of the same thing over and over again. Honestly, there's like several sculpting brushes that I use. If you want to know about like how I'm sculpting in general, I have like a in-depth tutorial about that and I go over each of the brushes individually. So that's probably the best place to look if you want to know more about that. But this video is already about like an hour long total, and I want to try to keep it as concise as possible. So that's why I'm somewhat talking about things at a higher level here. It's just I just can't teach ZBrush like from scratch every time. So because I have everything as just one subdivision level here with how I'm working, that gives me a lot of ability to sort of work loosely and use all these different tools. Now, if I had like multiple subdivisions on here, then I couldn't really be using Sculptris Pro mode. It won't work, or Dynameshing, because that would delete my subdivisions. And there's other things too. Like I can just mask out a piece, and then with the move brush or with the transpose tool, I can just hold control and transpose something, and it's going to duplicate that part that is masked. That's what you saw me do in the back there, and I kind of have it just a couple pieces just sitting in the back like independently. I think that I might actually merge those later on. It's a good idea to merge these pieces if they start to become all like independent pieces, because the transition with the hair, I mentioned this in the part 1, is really important. Like you don't really want things just crashing into one another. So if you start to get lots of pieces that are sort of independent and crashing through each other, it might be a good idea to use Dynamesh to connect those again. And really, like when you're working with ZBrush, you can work non-destructively even when you're doing destructive commands like Dynamesh by simply duplicating your model out and then using that duplicate model as a way of getting back detail that you might have lost. So that's really what projection is all about. When you have another model that's roughly in the same place, you can always project details back. And there's also nice tricks you can use to, like using a morph target or using history recall. Those kinds of tools enable you to get back to previous states if you muddy up your forms with a Dynamesh or something. So just something to remember, that usually, like if you're gonna do something that will sort of like make you lose some details, you've got a couple of options. You can work around that and just resculpt it, or you can reproject details by duplicating out a mesh. And there's always an option there, and it's just about weighing like the pros and cons of how fast said option will be. So what you just saw me do there is this section explains this tool that I like to use called Curve Quad Fill. So I'm slowing down the video a little bit here so you can see better what's happening. Curve Quad Fill, just like as you saw, I drew out with a spline a shape, and it just fills it in. And it can be really handy for like wispy hair like this, because it's a very quick way of getting like that kind of shape up in space, just along the plane that we're viewing from. And so as you can see, the geo is kind of a mess right now. So I'm going to use Z Modeler, and I'm going to add some thickness to it. So at first I deleted faces so that there was no thickness, and then I added some thickness with Z Modeler, and then now I'm using Sculptris Pro with Smooth to get some geo back in there so that I can move things around. So really just sort of the same tools that you see me using all the time, moving stuff around, Sculptris Pro to add geo. Eventually what I'll probably do here is make this a nice mesh again. So again, could have done this lots of different ways at this point, but you'll sort of see me just leveraging all these different tools in one shot with this method with Curve Quad Fill to start. So I'm just deleting some extra geo that was hanging around there. So selecting it and then saying delete hidden. But yeah, so this is some geo here. I have I believe what I did here after, let's see, I'm probably gonna polygroup this thing from the front so that, or maybe I'll just like hide the rest. to get auto-retopologize and get it back. Frankly, this is maybe like in some of the stuff not the total like fastest exact way to do it, but yeah, there's a lot of problem solving involved when you do this stuff, and sometimes you'll kind of brute force things when you go in a direction, and then later on you'll realize, oh, like I could have maybe done X, Y, or Z to make that process a little faster and streamlined. But yeah. Okay, so what I'm doing there is I went to the Polygroups menu and I used group front, and so that just like looks at the angles, and if there's a front angle, then I can group by that angle. And then I used the polygroups that created as a way of driving the Z remeshers. That's what I almost always do. So then now I'm back to a plane again, and I'll probably just sort of retopologize this again. So you can retopologize many times to so that's going to be polished by features, which smooths out the edges. It's a deformation tab, but I have it in my UI. So yeah, so I got back to a plane, and then just with simply auto retopologizing a few times and smoothing out edges, now you can see how I can get like super clean geo again. And I'm finding like little errors, and then I'm just deleting those, and then I can go back and retopologize again if I need to. But the nice thing about having really clean geo like this in this kind of circumstance is it becomes really easy to work with, as opposed to like messy geo where you wouldn't be able to easily stretch pieces apart like this. So it is kind of worth the effort of retopologizing it and to get it like this. So I've added some thickness back, and now I've got really clean geo, and now I'm just sort of moving it around so that from different angles that it just kind of looks interesting. I don't want like just a completely flat plane, that wouldn't be good. So it's a matter of getting some curves in there from different angles, and then making sure that, of course, that it matches the concept here is one of the more important parts, of course. So one of the things you saw that I did there is with the mask lasso tool is I can select an edge, and then I can just go ahead and I can pull the opposite side out. So that's a good way for me to add thickness to something with just a move brush, because if I were to use an inflate, like inflate is oftentimes a brush that I use to add thickness to things, but I didn't want to pull. Inflate pulls everything out on its normals, and I didn't want to do that here. I just wanted it to be thicker, like on the z-axis, like up and down. Right here I was realizing that like I didn't have, like this wasn't long enough, and I didn't want to mess it up. So you'll see like I'm trying to figure out, okay, well how do I actually get this sort of back to one piece so that I can just extrude this a few times to make this longer. And I'm sort of struggling with ZModeler right now because there's like a funny edge on the other side that it kept on extruding. You can see it doing it there too. So I just had to figure out like why is that edge happening, and then there's an extra point here, so I just bridged those two dots, and then I can collapse it. So there is a collapse, and then I collapse it, and then now it's like kind of like a flat piece again. So if I were to use ZModeler and then extrude, then it becomes really easy. And now I can just mask that, so I have just that one thing, and I'm just moving it out, and then I'm adding a bunch of subdivisions in the center so that I have it's longer without modifying the geo in the other area. So it's a really fast way to work with ZModeler. I use it a bunch. A lot of people are intimidated by ZModeler, but it's actually like a really good tool, and it's relatively intuitive. So I recommend folks try to use it here and there, at least like ease into it, because it's really not practical to be doing like sending a mesh to another program just for simple tasks like this, where you can do it so easily with ZModeler. Now I just auto-retopologized again, and it's super clean, right? And so that's kind of a long way of getting this particular mesh that I want, that very much resembles what I see in the concept. Could have done it some more direct ways in hindsight, but you can see that like in the end it's working well, and and then I can move on from there and just keep trying to plug away at this. The this portion here is now about hair sketching the other volumes in the back. I think this is kind of an important one to think about, because sure, I have the concept from the front, but I don't have any kind of concept in the back, and I'm really just making this up as I go and trying to think about like, well, what is the front doing that I can sort of replicate that feeling that makes it feel natural to the back. So my number one thing really is trying to keep the integrity and logic of what's happening in the front. I'm thinking about how these hairs just sort of flow into this like wispy curl that's happening on the side, and how they might overlap. I'm also, from experience, I know that if I just create strands everywhere consistently over the length of the entire thing, that tends to get kind of noisy and boring. And so I'm very much trying to mix up like the thickness and the thinness of these pieces. I let them sort of just fade into like one solid piece sometimes on purpose. Then I kind of sharpen other areas up. You'll notice that I'm masking certain areas with the mask lasso tool, and then I can sharpen that mask, and then I can just move things around with a big move brush. And so that's an easy way to get really really nice, clean, overlapping shapes, is by masking like this. And you'll see me do that a lot. And that tends to really make a sculpture look a lot more detailed and interesting when you have overlapping shapes. So it's something that I think about a lot as I work through this. And frankly, I'm just sort of sketching on here, right? And finding shapes. I don't know exactly what I'm doing. I'm just trying to leverage like what I know about design and what makes hair feel good, and experimenting with big blocks of shape. A lot of time I'm using the clay buildup here. I also have a version of clay buildup that I made that it doesn't have the banding as much. It's useful in some cases. It sort of doesn't work the greatest all the time. So honestly, clay buildup is great. You just have to smooth out the banding afterwards. This next section is kind of a funny one because I just used Initialize rollout here under Tool to make a Helix 3D, because I noticed that little piece sort of like of hair under her mouth was sort of a spirally shape. And I don't know, is this really like the best way to do it? I do know that if I were to try to like actually like extrude a sculpture using Sculptris Pro or the snake hook with Sculptris Pro mode on, that would get really difficult and messy. So just having some base geo sort of doing this twirly thing, this spiral thing that I see as a starting point seems to be like the obvious choice for me. I mean, really, like when you're sculpting, a lot of times you're just trying to find what is like the most basic primitive shape to start with that will get you the furthest when you start making something, and then modifying that to with just regular sculpting tools after that. So I don't have a ton of experience with the rollout for Helix. I'm actually just experimenting a lot, playing around with the different curves and seeing what it does. And I'm just trying to get something that feels kind of like what I'm seeing in the concept. And then at a certain point, I'll just be like, well, that's fine enough. I can just sculpt on this and I'll get there. So it's not like, just like with all this, it just has to be rough, because I'm going to clean up things later on and make it really nice later. And if it's a little messy, as long as I can have a base to work off of that's a little bit more refined and a little bit more in the right place, that's really what matters at this stage. And so anyways, this is me initializing it. So now I have a piece of geo, and I'm just gonna move it around and stretch it a little bit, get it generally set up, and then put it into place. And then it's its own subtool. Of course, you know, when you have separate subtools, they're not going to be connected, but I can always connect it later on if I feel I need to. And the way that I generally do that, like I mentioned previously, was I'll just merge subtools together into one, and then I'll Dynamesh. And the cool thing about Dynamesh is anything that's touching is just gonna merge those pieces together, and it'll do so in a pretty nice way, actually. And it'll delete like extra stuff that isn't needed. The main thing you need to watch out though with Dynamesh is if you have like very thin planes, it might like create really gross geo that's sort of like disappearing. And in that case, it's really just about making sure that you have enough thickness so that it doesn't do that, and then you have enough resolution on your Dynamesh so that it doesn't do that. So if that ever happens to you, it's just about how much thickness is in your mesh and how much resolution you have with the Dynamesh. So playing around with that, you'll get the feel of it if you don't already know exactly what I'm talking about. So now that I have this sort of curly shape in there, I'm just going ahead and polishing that a little bit. Sometimes, you know, like you'll see something in a concept and you'll be like, hey, like maybe I'll just do this differently because it might work better. But I do oftentimes do that depending on the circumstances. In this case, I really did want to maintain the integrity of the concept and just do the thing that I saw. So I didn't opt for that here. And I just also thought that this was like a good opportunity to show you how I might handle something that's a little weird and unusual than what you might typically face with sculpting hair. So just see some different methods of how to approach these problems and potential solutions. And yeah, I'm not always finding the best, most streamlined path, but that's what this is all about, is just loosely sculpting in forms, getting the basics in there, and then we'll adjust everything and make it super nice and clean. And that's actually like what the next phase of this will be, is it'll be me just taking what I have with the hair and right here, this is me prepping for the first real auto-retopologizing. And auto-retopologizing is like a really big part of my workflow because of many reasons, really. The main reason being that once you have clean geo, it enables you to do a lot of things. Even just your simple like smooth brush will work a lot better at that point. And when I'm ready and I have clean geo that I can commit to, then I can actually I can start to create something that is going to stick around longer. Because if I auto-retopologize something and I have subdivisions on it, I don't want to have to keep doing that over and over and over again. I really want to do it like once or twice and then just stick with that model. So before auto-retopologizing, I generally want to make sure that the shapes are there as accurately as I can. Like I didn't miss any big shapes that I'll really need later on, because if I did, it's kind of hard to merge those shapes together again later on once you have subdivisions on there. So just to really sell this to you all about like this process is, you know, roughing in the shapes with no subdivision levels as far as you can, and then committing to a auto-retopologize with subdivision levels, and then leveraging that. And you'll see how powerful that really is here as we work through this. Right now, after sort of trying to get the last shapes in there, so I tried to get the last shapes in the hair going so that I didn't forget anything that I really needed when I retopologize. And now this part right here is just me selecting things and cleaning things up. So I just use Sculptris Pro to remove a couple of merged pieces. So if I just keep smoothing that edge, you saw that it just kind of went away. I'm smoothing that out to make that go away with Sculptris Pro mode on. And so now those aren't connected anymore. I can just sort of grow the pieces out. See, I'm growing it, and then I'm creating a polygroup from the visibility, from what is visible right there. And so I'm growing this piece out, and then I say polygroup group visible. So group visible is something I use all the time to create my polygroups. So it's just isolating visually what I want to group, and then saying group visible. And once I have all these polygroups sort of set up, then I can go ahead and I can auto-retopologize. And what it's going to do is, with these polygroups set up, is it will auto-retopologize based on the polygroup. So I have this keep groups setting on in ZRemesher, and that's going to force the retopology. It's going to do two things. It's going to force a loop around the area that's polygrouped, which is going to be really good so you don't get spiral loops everywhere. And then it's going to give me a certain level of control as to like how the polygons work. So after this retopology here, you're going to see that it should be pretty clean, and I have loops in logical places. So like if you want a long strand of hair, you probably want even loops running down the entire strand, and you want it to be just like without any spiral loops, just a band all the way up. So that's the reason why I make these individual strands just one polygroup. And then it's kind of like when you're doing UVs, you wanna sort of split things up. It's very similar to how you would do the polygroups in this case. I do have a tutorial on auto-retopologizing with specified loops. It's on my ArtStation, and you can check that out, and it might make even more sense if you just go through that tutorial quickly. But that's the logic between this retopology. And once I have that, so I was building up to the point where I felt confident that I can actually retopologize this thing one time and it will be good, and I don't have to keep retopologizing it because I forgot pieces, right? So I have like all the masses there, and then I'm confident about those masses, and then I polygrouped the pieces accordingly so that when I auto-retopologize, it'll give me the best results. And then I have this auto-retopologize mesh, and once I have that, I can project details back from the original mesh if I've lost them, or I can actually just sculpt fresh. A lot of times I will sculpt fresh, because when I'm sculpting fresh, it'll be like another iteration. It's kind of like when you draw something, you sketch it in, and then you turn the opacity way down, and then you sketch on top of that again, and you get like a little bit better drawing. It's a lot like that. And so oftentimes I will do that rather than reproject details from what I had on the sort of like dirty mesh. So that was just like cleaning things up with the hair, and I got it relatively nice already. It has subdivision levels, and so now I'm going to move on to cleaning up this base body. Currently the eyes are merged into the head, and that's probably not ideal in this situation. So I'm starting to mask the eyes so that I can hide the mask and then isolate those pieces, and then I deleted out the eyes once they're isolated out. So I just said delete hidden once they're not showing, and then of course I have to have no subdivisions at that point. And then I'm just smoothing this out because I wanted to remove the eyes entirely so that I could just use primitive geo to in place of them. So I have a reference mesh where, before doing that, deleting the eyes, I duplicated the mesh, and now I'm just using that reference mesh to move a insert multi-mesh of a sphere roughly into place. So I can just see like, okay, with the wireframe showing, I can see, is it like actually sitting on top? And if I really needed to be perfect, I could even just like mask the area that I want to reproject directly on the surface, and then reproject it perfectly. But in this case, I felt like I was going to need to sculpt the eyes a little bit better than how I had them. So I wasn't really worried about being like exact on the surface. I just wanted something roughly in that shape that was round, and round enough, and then I could use that and then hide the base geo that I was matching to, and just use the geo that didn't have the eyes there. So you'll see me turn off this reference mesh here in a moment. And now I'm going to do the same thing with the teeth, but this time I'm using a different method because I'm using the Topology brush. And the Topology brush is really cool because you just draw these little lines on here like you see me doing, and then it's going to create some geo like if you create a square. And then if I just click on it, then I have a little bit of thickness and some geo. You'll see me isolate it here, and then I'm just going to move it around. Just move like really basic, because it's really basic low poly geo. I can just move it, and it's not going to get too crazy. Moving it into place, and then I'm going to use dynamic subdivision levels to make it nice and smooth. But before I do that, I'll just add a little loop in there with insert and the ZModeler tool, and I can even I can sculpt on a super low poly mesh like this, and just, you saw me like push out with just a standard brush. I pushed out that edge to get a little curveness, a little curve going, and then with dynamic subdivisions on, then you have something that's like super clean, and sometimes that's all you need. So yeah, just kind of moving that in place and getting a super clean mesh. I creased the edges of the poly group so that it smooths out nicely with dynamic subdivisions. And then I hid the original teeth. Now you see me just editing those new parts, and I am starting to, this portion, I'm gonna start breaking up the rest of the body into polygroups so that I can create, with Auto-Retopologize, like a super clean mesh from this. And so it's kind of like more of the same. So you see how I broke up those polygroups so that there'll be loops at those joints. And then here I'm realizing like, oh shoot, I didn't merge that shoulder in with the body. So I went and I did that. I might have Dynameshed it together. I believe I did, because if I Dynamesh, it's going to keep the polygroups I already had there. And then here I'm using ZModeler to just like clean up a little bit on the eye, and then Auto-Retopologizing again. Here with the nose, little ZModeler, moving things. I'm just moving stuff back into place because I Auto-Retopologized a few times without reprojecting, so it kind of got smaller. So I'm just going around the mesh with the reference mesh there, and then just using inflate tool to push things back out. So when I reproject now, it's going to give me a little bit better results. And so you see, I'm just sort of problem solving some little things, finding little holes, cleaning them up, and then I can always Auto-Retopologize again. So sometimes it takes a few tries, but the main thing is that with a stylized mesh like this, you're going to want it really smooth. So I can always save off one of the older mesh versions and reproject from that, and then just keep brute forcing this retopology as I need it. So this here is making some more custom edits, because I just felt like this isn't totally necessary, but I felt like this part of the nose could use an actual like extrusion inward, so there's a little extra geo on this like base model. I'm slowing up the video here now too, so that I can talk through this at a more reasonable rate. I actually just masked everything except for that little piece, and then when I invert the mask and then I move it and hold control, that will extrude something for me. So I have like a little edge loop in there, and then I just dropped a little edge loop with ZModeler as well. And now I'm like, okay, this geo is more reasonable, because now that there's a little inset, I'll have a hole there, and then I either Auto-Retopologize once again, or I just use that. One option too that you can do is you can freeze subdivision levels. You can try this, and then that enables you to temporarily modify the first subdivision level, and then when you unclick freeze subdivision levels, it brings back the details depending on the circumstances, this will work well, or it may not work at all. So you'll have to like play around with it. It is an option to try for sure. I do use it a decent amount, and at this point, I've sort of figured out like what works the best for me in terms of like speed and efficiency, in terms of like the results that I want. So yeah, so here I'm slowing things down because this is going to be like how to do photo matching, and I just really want to show like a little slower how the setup goes. So I just loaded into Spotlight. I loaded the texture, and then I select the texture and say add to Spotlight, and that'll pop up Spotlight. Now Spotlight has a couple of hotkeys that you want to know about. I think it's like Shift Z or Control Z and then just Z, and that turns on the widget or turns off the widget. So like if in one mode you'll see just the image, and in another mode with Spotlight you'll see the image and the widget that lets you like change the opacity or move the image. But a lot of times what you'll see is I think I'm just pressing Z here. Again, check the internet if you want to know the exact hotkey. I believe I'm right, but I could be wrong. This is like, for me, everything is muscle memory at this point. So I could easily just be doing it and not really realize what I'm pressing. But anyways, this is turning it off and on. And really, like, that's the majority of how I do it. Like, I have a pretty strong opacity on Spotlight, where it's not too see-through, and then I turn it off and on to see how well it's matching. Because if I try to like have an opacity that's sort of in between, it doesn't usually work as well for me. I have a hard time really seeing what's going on. I'm gonna try to change the material to make it easier to see what's going on when the image is overlaying. But yeah, with that hotkey, it's really easy to just like flash and then be like, okay, I flash forward, flash back. Okay, the ear needs to move about here. Then flash forward and flash back. Like, okay, that wasn't right. I need to move a little more. And then it's just slowly doing that to get things in the right place. Part of what I'm doing at this very moment, though, is you'll notice I'm not really moving anything yet. And that's because I want to just make sure that I have a similar angle and perspective. And then I'm going to set up a camera. And so up there at the top, you can go to Document and ZApp Link and save cameras. I have it in my UI up there. And so I just like, once I got the camera exactly where I want it, I saved it to Custom 1 and the top of my UI there. And you'll see me pressing that button all the time to get back to that exact same angle so I can match the reference. Reference matching will not work without a consistent camera like this. So if you were to change your angle slightly every time and be matching it, well, of course, it's going to be in the wrong place. So you need a consistent camera, and that's how I do it. So I save a camera, and then I turn off and on Spotlight. And here I'm just playing around with some different materials because I'm trying to find something that helps me see with that reference image on. And again, it's just really hard for me, at least. And I've seen people use this skin, like poly skin or skin base. That seems to work okay. So I'm just going to use that. But really, there's no perfect solution as far as I'm concerned here. Really, just turning it off and on is generally the best way for me, at least. Also worth mentioning, all that work going into auto-retopologizing. Of course, it's easier to sculpt on stuff with subdivision levels and auto-retopology, but also, like, more importantly, when I'm doing this photo matching phase, I can go to the lowest subdivision when I'm moving stuff, and because I'm in a low subdivision, when I move it, it's not going to create all these artifacts. It'll actually smooth things. It'll maintain like all the detail on the higher sub D level and not create like artifacts in the surface when I'm moving a lower subdivision level. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, you'll have to play around with this. Just trust me, when you're moving something and you're photo matching, you want to have a very low subdivision level, and then every once in a while you can switch back up to your higher subdivision level to see how that's looking, and then make adjustments as needed. So here I am, I'm just sort of polishing things up based on what I see. Obviously the hand is still pretty far off, so what you'll see me do is just mask everything except for that arm and hand, and then I just use the move transpose to like actually move the rest of it up. The hair is not part of the body, so that makes it kind of easy for me to manipulate the body without messing up the hair, and that's also an advantage of having different subtools where things are really you don't want them to be connected. Like it's important for the look that they're actually disconnected. So when there's those obvious things like eyeballs and hair and teeth that are disconnected, then that's how I do it, because it'll look better and it will give me more control. But with this hair, I'm trying to keep it as connected as possible. You could have more parts disconnected than what I've done here, and then connect them at the very end if it makes it easier for you to work with. But you can see with my methods of creating polygroups and different little tricks with the brushes, maintaining polygroups and masking by polygroups and all of that, I've become pretty efficient working even with complicated pieces that are still connected. But I probably could have disconnected more and then connected it later on. It's either way will work fine for you, as long as you're just careful about how you connect them, and then taking the time to auto-retopologize after you've connected them with Dynamesh. So just kind of looking through, and every once in a while you'll see me click back on that camera so that I'm like right in the perfect place. And then these flashes of it coming off and on. This is very sped up now. It's just me looking and seeing, okay, what do I need to change on the model to match what I'm seeing in the reference? And so this is sped up like this because it's just really repetitive tasks at this point of me looking to see how it's matching, and then making sure it is matching, and then going back and like turning the model and making sure that it actually makes sense in 3D space. So like if I need a really harsh crease on a particular edge that I see from the front angle, like it's doing something like that, then I'll just like go ahead and turn the model, and then use like a damp standard with turned inverted on by holding Alt, and then just like pull an edge out and then just finesse the edge, and that'll make like sort of a crease that appears from the front, if that makes any sense. So I'm doing stuff like that. I'm masking pieces so that I can move them without messing up the other pieces. There's some more modeling that I'm doing as I'm going through this and cleaning up. I'm oftentimes not at the highest subdivision. Like right now, you can see I'm not at the highest subdivision because I'm mostly moving things around. But like I mentioned earlier, I'll move up and down subdivisions as needed, because that just gives me more control. And ultimately, what I want to do is this being a very stylized piece, I want things to be like very smooth and organic feeling. I think like not having extra like wobbly details in a lot of these forms is part of the style in this case. So the transitions that are happening on the face, and in this case where I'm working on the arm, it needs to be very, very smooth. If it's wobbly at all, that'll just take away from the look of it. So when I'm sculpting in 3D, one of my main goals is to make it not look 3D, and so I try to avoid stuff that makes it feel like it's a 3D sculpture. So if you see like wobbly shading somewhere, that makes it feel like it's a sculpture more, and it's not how you would, like, especially for something like this, you wouldn't be painting in value, like wobbly value on this arm. It would just be like consistent smoothness going across. So actually removing any of that kind of detail is like fundamentally what I'm trying to do with an arm like this. So it can be tricky because if you move the model, it's going to start creating some of that wobbly detail, but that's where having the subdivisions really comes in, and it makes it really key for smoothing out the shapes. And here I'm smoothing out the face, smoothing out the teeth a little bit. We're kind of coming up to the end actually, so you'll see me cut out pretty soon. But this is just like little polishy stuff. Of course, I can continue to match even closer and closer. You'll see the final version, but this is pretty much it here now. That's the process. And so here are the results of part 2, blocking in the hair.